Ladies and gentlemen, let me tell you something powerful before a man ever comes back into your life. He will test you, not with love, not with effort, but with silence, with distance, with confusion. He'll send that one message, that one like, that one tiny breadcrumb, just to see if you'll still chase him. It's never about reconnecting, it's about control, and in that moment, how you respond decides everything. Because the truth is, he's not testing your love, he's testing your strength. And when you no longer take the bait, that's when you finally win the game. And you know what's interesting about people who leave your life? They rarely do it cleanly. They don't just disappear, never to be heard from again. No, they linger, they test. They play this game where they act like they're gone, but not really. And before they ever come back, they test you with one thing. They test your strength. They test your reaction. They test whether you still need them the way you once did. Because deep down, they want to know, have you moved on, or are you still waiting for me? And that's the test. That's the thing they'll always throw at you before deciding whether they can come back into your world. It's not random, it's deliberate. They'll text you out of nowhere after months of silence. Maybe a simple, "Hey, how have you been?" Maybe they'll like your photo. Maybe they'll comment something small, something harmless, but make no mistake. It's not harmless, it's strategic. It's them checking the temperature. They want to see if you'll melt the moment they show up again. They want to see if your self-worth is still tied to their attention. And in that moment, right there is where your power lies, because how you respond tells them everything. It tells them whether you've grown, whether you've healed, whether you've found peace without them. It tells them whether they still have access to your emotions, or whether you've built boundaries that protect your heart this time. That's the real test, not what they say, not whether they apologize, but whether you've learned to love yourself more than you loved the potential of them. And you see, people test you before they come back because they're not sure who they'll find when they do. They remember the version of you that waited, the version that tolerated excuses, the version that believed every promise. But they don't know if that version still exists, so they test the waters. They want to know if they can walk right back in without consequence. And if they sense that same softness, that same eagerness to please, they'll come back just to feel powerful again. But if they sense indifference, if they sense peace, they realize the game is over. And that's why your calmness is so dangerous to someone who once had power over you. They can handle your anger, they can handle your tears, but your peace, that's terrifying, because peace means you don't need them to explain anymore. Peace means you've accepted what happened and moved forward anyway. Peace means you've taken your story back. And when they realize they can't disrupt that peace, that's when they know they no longer have control. And the truth is, you teach people how to treat you by what you tolerate. And the moment they feel you're still waiting for them, they know they can keep you waiting forever. But when you've outgrown that space, when you no longer respond to breadcrumbs, something changes. They start to question themselves. They start to wonder what happened. Why didn't you reply this time? Why didn't your heart race when they messaged you? Why didn't you drop everything to answer their call? Suddenly, the test they set for you becomes a mirror for them. Now they're the ones questioning if they still have a chance. Now they're the ones feeling the loss. And this is the part most people miss. When someone tests you like that, it's not a sign of love, it's a sign of ego. They're not coming back because they miss you. They're coming back to see if they still matter. They're coming back to feed on validation, not to build something real. If it were love, it wouldn't be a test. Love doesn't require you to prove that you've been waiting. It shows up honestly, consistently, humbly. It doesn't sneak back through likes and late-night texts. It knocks on your door and says, I know I messed up. I want to make it right. Anything less than that is manipulation disguised as curiosity. And I know how tempting it is to respond, to believe that maybe this time it's different, because when someone once meant the world to you, it's hard not to feel a flicker when they reappear. But that flicker isn't love, it's memory, it's your heart remembering what it felt like to hope, but you can't build a future on memories. You can't heal by reopening wounds just to see if they still hurt. That's not closure, that's self-sabotage. And so when he tests you, when he sends that message, when he watches your story, when he calls you out of nowhere, pause. Don't react. Don't try to prove anything. Just observe, because your silence speaks louder than any words you could send. Your silence says, I've outgrown the version of me that settled for uncertainty. Your silence says, I don't chase clarity anymore. I create it for myself. And that silence will echo louder in his mind than any reply ever could, and you have to understand something. If he's really meant to come back, it won't be as a test. It'll be as a choice. It'll be with intention, consistency, and emotional honesty. But if he's just coming back to test your boundaries, then your job is to pass that test by refusing to take it. You pass it by staying grounded in your peace, by protecting the energy you've rebuilt since he left. You pass it by realizing that closure doesn't come from his words. It comes from your decision to move forward, regardless of whether he understands what he lost. And he's not testing your love, he's testing your growth, and the way you respond will determine whether you repeat the past or rise above it. Because here's the truth. The universe will keep sending you the same lesson until you finally learn it. It will keep bringing the same type of person, the same pattern, the same heartbreak, until you finally say no more. Not out of anger, not out of bitterness, but out of love for yourself. And when you stop letting someone test your worth, you begin to live from it. You start making choices from a place of peace instead of pain. You start realizing that not everyone who leaves deserves a second chance. Some people leave so you can finally meet the version of yourself who no longer needs to be chosen to feel valuable. Some people test you so you can prove to yourself that you've healed beyond the point of needing their validation. And one day he'll look at you, maybe from afar, maybe through a screen, and he'll see it. He'll see that the person he once knew no longer exists. He'll see that you didn't wait, that you didn't crumble, that you didn't stay stuck. He'll realize he tested your strength, and instead of breaking, you evolved. He'll realize that the silence he thought was indifference was actually transformation, because you stopped chasing what confused you and started protecting what brought you peace. And that's the ultimate test. The moment you choose yourself, the moment you realize you don't need them to come back for you to move forward. Because the truth is, the person who truly deserves you won't test your patience, your loyalty, or your strength. They'll recognize it, cherish it, and never make you question it. Until then, don't fall for the test. Pass it by remembering who you've become since the day they left. Pass it by knowing that no one who truly values you would ever need to test if you still care. They'd never risk losing someone who's already proven they're worth the effort. And because when they realize they can no longer shake your peace, they start to panic. They start to feel that subtle shift in energy, the kind that says, I'm no longer waiting to be chosen. And that scares them more than any argument ever could, because deep down, they always expected you to be there. They expected your door to stay open, your heart to stay soft, your attention to stay ready, but now it's different. Now you're not cold, you're calm, you're not bitter, you're balanced, you're not ignoring them. You've simply outgrown the version of yourself that lived for their approval. And it's in that moment they realize something powerful. They lost the emotional privilege of access. They lost the right to reach into your life whenever they felt lonely or uncertain, because while they were out testing your patience, you were out building your strength. You were out finding meaning again, learning to wake up without checking your phone, learning to feel whole without needing a message from them to validate your day. And that's the kind of growth they can't compete with. Because while they were rehearsing how to reappear, you were learning how to never need their reappearance again. And when you start healing, you start breaking invisible chains. You begin to see how much of your peace was tied to someone else's behavior. How much of your mood depended on whether they replied, whether they noticed, whether they cared. You start realizing that love without respect is chaos, and attention without consistency is manipulation. You begin to crave stability more than excitement. You begin to crave honesty more than charm. You begin to crave someone who shows up not because they want to win you back, but because they want to build something real this time. But here's the truth: most people don't talk about growth feels lonely at first. When you finally stop playing the game, you feel the silence. The quiet feels empty, but that emptiness is where healing begins. That's where your standards are rebuilt. That's where your heart stops reaching for people who confuse comfort with love. And though that silence may ache at first, it's also the space where your new strength breathes. It's where you begin to remember who you were before their absence became your obsession. And that's why when they come back to test you, they're not ready for what they'll find. They expect the old version of you, the one who would drop everything to answer. But now your energy feels different. You're grounded. You're not performing for their attention. You're not trying to impress. You're not over-explaining. You're not waiting. You've become someone who knows that peace isn't found in their presence. It's found in your boundaries. And that's the moment they realize the game is over, because they can no longer manipulate a version of you that no longer exists. You see, people often confuse control with connection. They think that as long as they can trigger your emotions, they still have a place in your life. But once you've healed, those triggers lose their power. Once you've rebuilt your self-worth, their opinion stops defining your value. Once you've learned to validate yourself, their silence stops being punishment, it becomes freedom. And you start noticing the difference between someone who genuinely misses you and someone who just misses control. The former shows up with humility, with accountability, with consistency. The latter shows up with confusion, with half-effort, with empty words. And because you've done the work, you can now tell the difference. You no longer mistake familiarity for connection. You no longer confuse mixed signals with mystery. You no longer chase chaos and call it chemistry. You've learned that real love doesn't test your patience. It earns your trust. And when you reach that level of clarity, you stop being afraid of losing people. You start understanding that not everyone who leaves deserves to come back. You stop trying to convince anyone to stay, because you finally get that if someone truly valued you, they wouldn't have needed to lose you to see it. If someone truly loved you, they wouldn't test you, they'd trust you. They wouldn't play games, they'd protect your peace. They wouldn't disappear to figure out what they want, they'd build with you while figuring it out together. But here's the beautiful irony. The moment you stop needing them is the moment they start needing you. Because now, you're not reacting, you're responding, you're not reaching, you're receiving. You've shifted from proving your worth to preserving it. And in doing so, you've become magnetic in a new way. Not because you're trying to attract them, but because you're finally aligned with your true value. They feel that shift, They feel the loss of emotional control, and suddenly the test they set for you becomes a lesson for them. And because that's what life does, it teaches through contrast. It shows them the difference between someone who was available at any cost and someone who knows their worth. It shows them what peace looks like when it's protected, not negotiated. It shows them that you didn't harden, you healed. And that healing makes you unrecognizable to anyone who once thrived on your insecurity. And so when that message comes in, the one that sounds casual but carries the weight of old patterns, you'll feel the difference this time. You won't feel that rush of adrenaline, you won't feel that anxiety, you'll feel awareness, you'll feel gratitude for how far you've come. Because the test that used to break you is now the proof of how much you've grown, and instead of reacting, you'll breathe. You'll smile, knowing that you no longer need to play along. And they'll wonder why you're not replying. They'll wonder if you're seeing someone new. They'll wonder if you still care. But what they'll never fully grasp is that your silence isn't about someone else. It's about you. It's about choosing peace over patterns. It's about realizing that your worth isn't determined by who comes back. It's determined by who you've become in their absence. And that's the most empowering transformation there is. Because when you reach that point, you stop fearing endings. You understand that endings aren't punishment, they're protection, they're redirection, they're the universe saying, you've outgrown this version of love, there's something better waiting for you. And every test someone gives you before coming back is really the universe asking, have you learned your lesson yet? And when you finally answer with calm, with clarity, with self-respect, the lesson ends, the cycle breaks. Because you can't be tested by something that no longer has control over you. And one day, they might see you again, maybe in person, maybe through a post, maybe through mutual friends, and they'll notice it. That glow that doesn't come from attention, but from alignment. That confidence that doesn't come from validation, but from healing. They'll realize they tested your strength, and instead of folding, you flourished. Instead of waiting for closure, you created it. Instead of waiting for them to come back, you came back to yourself. And they'll remember the person who used to answer right away, who used to overthink every silence, who used to make excuses for their behavior. And then they'll see who you are now, someone who doesn't beg to be understood, who doesn't fight to be chosen, who doesn't chase what's unclear. Someone who knows that love without respect is not love at all, and you've learned that real connection doesn't need to test loyalty, it builds it. Real love doesn't disappear to measure your patience, it stays to nurture your peace. Real love doesn't return just to see if it still has power. It shows up to rebuild what was broken with honesty and care. And so when someone tests you before coming back, understand this. You are not being evaluated. You are being invited to prove to yourself that you've evolved. You are being given an opportunity to respond from your healing, not your history. And the moment you do, everything changes. Because you'll realize that the person you were waiting for isn't the one on the other end of the message. It's the version of you that finally remembered her worth. And when that version fully awakens, no test can shake her. No silence can unsettle her. No temporary return can confuse her. Because she knows that peace is her new standard, and anything that threatens it doesn't deserve to stay. And because once you understand that peace is your new standard, you stop entertaining anything that disturbs it. You stop explaining yourself to people who are committed to misunderstanding you. You stop accepting half effort from those who only show up when it's convenient. You stop believing that love has to be proven through pain, because now you've learned the power of stillness, the strength that comes from not reacting, not chasing, not needing. You've learned that silence can be your loudest boundary and calmness can be your most powerful answer. And they might try again. They might show up with nostalgia, with apologies that sound sincere, with stories about how much they've changed. And maybe part of you will still feel that pull, that ache of familiarity. But now you'll see through it. You'll listen differently. You won't just hear the words, they'll have to match the actions. Because when you've been through heartbreak that broke you open, you don't settle for potential anymore. You demand consistency, you demand presence, you demand energy that feels safe, not confusing. And that's what maturity in love looks like. It's not about becoming harder, it's about becoming wiser. It's about realizing that love is not about intensity, it's about intention. It's not about grand gestures, it's about emotional reliability. You start valuing the small things, the effort, the honesty, the consistency that doesn't need to be chased. You start realizing that anyone who truly wants to be in your life will make it clear through action, not tests. And the truth is, people who leave rarely expect you to truly move on. They count on your hope. They count on your heart still being open. They count on you remembering the good times and forgetting the truth. But healing changes that. Healing sharpens your memory. It helps you see both the beautiful and the painful parts with clarity. You stop romanticizing the past and you start recognizing patterns. You see the moments you ignored your intuition, the times you excused behavior that hurt you, the times you settled for almost instead of enough. And from that awareness, your standards rise not because you're cynical, but because you finally know your worth. And that's what confuses them the most, because they remember the version of you that didn't know how powerful you were. They remember the one who would have done anything just to keep the connection alive, but now you're not that person anymore. You're no longer willing to shrink yourself to fit into someone else's comfort zone. You're no longer dimming your light to make them feel important. You're no longer apologizing for wanting more than crumbs. You've learned that being alone in peace is better than being attached in chaos. And that realization changes everything, because now, instead of trying to prove your value to someone who left, you start pouring that energy back into yourself. You start building the life you once thought you needed them to complete. You start finding joy in your independence, in your growth, in your solitude. You begin to attract people and opportunities that match the energy of who you're becoming, not who you used to be. You stop settling for connections that drain you and start gravitating toward those that align with your peace. And that's what true healing does. It doesn't make you untouchable. It makes you intentional. You start realizing that you don't have to prove your worth by fighting for anyone's attention. You start realizing that not every test deserves a response, because the more you evolve, the less you feel the need to explain your boundaries to anyone who benefited from you not having them. And here's the thing, they'll feel that shift. They'll feel it in the way you no longer chase closure. They'll feel it in the way your responses are shorter, calmer, detached. They'll feel it in the way your presence no longer revolves around them. That's when regret begins to set in, not because they lost the relationship, but because they lost the access. They lost the privilege of seeing your softness up close. They lost the version of you that would have done anything to keep the connection alive. And now they're left with the silence that their actions created, and that silence is powerful because silence doesn't just communicate absence, it communicates strength. It tells the story of someone who learned that peace is more valuable than closure. It tells the story of someone who stopped waiting for an apology to move on. It tells the story of someone who learned that love is not measured by how much pain you can endure, but by how much peace you're willing to protect. And you see, people come back not because the timing suddenly becomes right, but because they finally realize what they lost. But by the time they do, you've already outgrown the version of yourself that once waited. You've already learned to fill your own voids, to comfort your own heart, to validate your own worth. And when that happens, their return doesn't excite you, it reminds you how far you've come. You see the test for what it is, and you don't fall for it anymore. Because you've learned that not every door needs to be reopened just because someone knocks. And you begin to understand that the test isn't about them, it's about you. It's about whether you've really learned to trust your boundaries. It's about whether you've learned to choose peace over familiarity. It's about whether you've learned to let go, even when it would be easier to hold on. And when you pass that test, you unlock a version of yourself that can't be manipulated by temporary emotions anymore. You stop being controlled by nostalgia. You stop being defined by who left. You stop waiting for people to see your worth because you already see it yourself. And that's when you start attracting different energy entirely. Suddenly, the people entering your life aren't testing you, they're respecting you. They're not confusing you, they're communicating with you. They're not making you question your worth, they're confirming it through consistency. Because the moment you stop chasing, you start magnetizing. The moment you stop begging to be chosen, you start becoming impossible to ignore. And the people who once tested you will feel it. They'll feel the loss of your emotional availability, the warmth you used to give so freely. They'll realize that the attention they took for granted was a gift and that your patience had limits. They'll realize that they were never testing your loyalty. You were testing their intentions all along. And when they failed, you didn't break. You just evolved, and that's the quiet power of healing. It's not loud. It's not dramatic. It's subtle, steady, and unstoppable. It's in the way you stop needing to explain yourself. It's in the way you stop reacting to the things that once consumed you. It's in the way your peace becomes your non-negotiable. And when you live from that space, you realize something profound. You don't have to win anyone back. You don't have to convince anyone to stay. You don't have to prove your worth to anyone who can't see it. And because the right person, the one who's aligned with your peace, won't test you before coming back. They won't need to. They'll recognize your value the first time, and they'll do the work to keep you. They'll meet you where you are, not try to drag you back into what you've outgrown. And when that happens, you'll finally understand why you had to go through the tests, the heartbreak, the silence. Because it was never about losing them, it was about finding you. And now, when they reach out again, when they send that message, when they test the waters to see if you still care, you won't respond from pain, you'll respond from power. You'll smile not because you want them back, but because you know that you've passed the test. Because you know that no matter what they say, no matter how much they try to pull you back into the past, you're no longer that person. You're no longer waiting, you're no longer proving, you're no longer hoping they'll come back. You're too busy walking forward toward peace, toward purpose, toward everything you were always meant to be. And because walking forward means you've stopped orbiting around the same memories that once held you hostage. You've stopped replaying the moments that broke you, stopped analyzing every word, stopped waiting for clarity that never came. You've finally realized that the answers you were searching for weren't hidden in their apologies, they were hidden in your ability to let go. And letting go doesn't mean you stop caring. It means you stop trying to control the outcome. It means you trust that what's meant for you will never require you to lose yourself in the process of keeping it. And the strength you've built in silence has turned into something unshakable. You no longer measure love by how hard you have to fight for it. You no longer confuse effort with struggle. You've learned that real love doesn't ask you to sacrifice your peace to prove your loyalty. It meets you in balance. It supports you in growth. It makes you feel safe, not small, and once you've experienced that kind of inner peace, no test can pull you back into chaos again. Because now you recognize the difference between connection and attachment. Connection nourishes your soul, attachment drains it. And there will still be moments when the past whispers, moments when your heart feels that faint echo of what once was. Healing doesn't erase memories, it transforms your relationship with them. You start to see the lessons behind the pain. You start to thank the experiences that once broke you, because they were the doorway to your evolution. You start to see that every heartbreak, every disappointment, every goodbye was actually a redirection toward the version of you that could finally stand tall, confident, and whole. And that's when everything begins to shift. You start carrying yourself differently. Your energy becomes calm but commanding. You stop begging to be understood and start choosing to be at peace. You stop explaining your worth and start living it. You stop trying to make people see your value because you know that the right people will never need convincing. That quiet confidence changes how the world responds to you. It changes how you respond to the world. And they might still test you, perhaps not with words but with presence. They might linger, show up in places you least expect, hoping to catch a glimpse of the person they once knew. But you've changed too much for them to recognize. Your glow has evolved. It's not born from trying to impress anymore, but from alignment, from knowing that your value isn't tied to anyone's validation. You no longer crave being chosen. You crave being understood, respected, matched in effort, and that shift makes you untouchable to the kind of energy that once broke you. And you begin to notice how much lighter life feels when you stop chasing what's uncertain. How much more beautiful mornings feel when you wake up without the weight of waiting. How much stronger your voice sounds when you speak from peace instead of pain. You start to fill your life with things that inspire you again, with people who uplift you, with goals that excite you, with moments that feel like freedom. And the more you build this life, the less appealing the past becomes. Because what you've created is something no test, no person, no fleeting connection can take away from you. And that's the real secret. Peace is magnetic. When you stop chasing what's inconsistent, you attract what's stable. When you stop proving, you start receiving. When you stop clinging to what's uncertain, you make space for what's secure. And that's when the universe starts sending you people who don't test your boundaries, they respect them. People who don't make you guess how they feel, they communicate it. People who don't disappear when things get hard, they stay and build. And you'll realize that the peace you fought so hard for wasn't just a phase. It was preparation. It was life preparing you to meet love that feels safe. Love that doesn't require you to lose yourself. But it all begins with passing the test, because every time someone comes back to test you, it's not about them, it's about your growth. It's about whether you've learned to trust your intuition, whether you've learned to listen to that inner voice that says, this energy feels familiar, but familiar doesn't mean right. It's about whether you've learned that not everyone who leaves deserves a return ticket. Because peace doesn't come from reopening closed doors. It comes from realizing you're finally standing in front of new ones. And when those new doors open, you walk through them differently. You walk through with boundaries that protect your softness, with standards that honor your worth, with self-respect that refuses to bend for temporary attention. You've learned that love should feel like peace, not confusion. That presence should feel like safety, not survival. You've learned that your heart is not a test someone else gets to grade. It's a sacred space that only those who understand its value are allowed to enter. And they'll sense that. The ones who once tested you will feel it even if they can't explain it. They'll feel it in your silence, in your absence, in the way you no longer seek their approval. They'll feel it when they realize they no longer have the power to make you doubt yourself, because once you stop living in reaction to someone's inconsistency, you become free. And freedom is what they were never prepared for. Freedom is what makes you unrecognizable to them. And you've stopped waiting for people to come back right. You've stopped needing apologies to heal. You've stopped needing explanations for why things fell apart. Because now you understand that closure doesn't always come from another person. It comes from accepting that sometimes people leave not because you weren't enough, but because they weren't ready for someone who was. It comes from understanding that someone's confusion is not your responsibility to fix. That someone's distance is not your cue to chase. That someone's silence is not your punishment, it's their loss. And so when they test you again, and they will, remember the lessons. Remember the nights you cried yourself to sleep. Remember the mornings you had to rebuild yourself piece by piece. Remember the strength it took to stand up again when you thought you never would. That's the strength you protect now. That's the strength you honor by not letting anyone who left once come back and disrupt the peace you fought to earn. And yes, there will be temptation. There will be moments where the memory feels sweeter than the truth. Moments where you'll wonder if maybe this time could be different. But before you go back, ask yourself, do you want comfort or do you want growth? Because comfort is what pulls you backward, but growth is what propels you forward. You can't evolve while holding hands with the past. You can't move into peace while entertaining what once broke it. You can't create a new story while rereading an old one hoping for a different ending. And you've come too far to fail this test now. You've built too much inner strength to let someone's inconsistency shake you. You've learned to love yourself in ways you never thought possible. You've learned that solitude isn't loneliness, it's sovereignty. It's the space where you meet the truest version of yourself. The version that no longer needs validation, no longer fears rejection, no longer confuses being wanted with being valued. And that's the ultimate evolution, because when you reach this place, you don't just protect your peace, you embody it. It becomes the standard by which every decision, every connection, every response is measured. You don't react, you choose. You don't chase, you attract. You don't beg, you align, and once you begin living from that space, life stops testing you with the same lessons. Because you've finally learned them, and the people who once triggered your insecurities now trigger your indifference. The situations that used to drain you now strengthen your boundaries. The emotions that used to control you now remind you of your power. You become the person you once needed, the one who knows when to stay, when to walk away, and when to let silence speak louder than words ever could. And that's when you realize the test was never about him. It was never about proving you could get him back. It was about proving to yourself that you could rise without him. It was about realizing that your value doesn't decrease because someone failed to recognize it. It was about learning that you don't lose anything by letting go. You only lose yourself by holding on to what's already gone. And you've passed the test not by reacting, but by remembering who you are. You've passed it by choosing peace over chaos, clarity over confusion, growth over comfort. And as you keep walking forward, you'll notice something extraordinary. The people who once tested you start fading into the background, and the ones who are meant for you start stepping forward. Because when you finally learn to stop repeating lessons, life rewards you with new blessings.